Hello, welcome to Scott's Odyssey. In the mid-1800s, family life in the Pennsylvania frontier depended heavily on farming and hunting. This particular story is no different in that regard, but what was being hunted turned from food to something completely different. Welcome to the location for the lost children of the Alleghenies. See you in a minute. Welcome back. If you've watched my videos before, thank you for your patronage, and I hope you enjoy this story of hope for the children lost in the Alleghenies. If you're new to Scott's Odyssey, welcome aboard, and please take a moment to click subscribe for more of this journey through odd to see stories of who we once were. It costs you nothing but a click and will give you continuous adventures in return. This is a story of the pioneering Cox family who were seeking their fortunes in independence, just as many others were doing in Pennsylvania during the 1800s. Shortly after their marriage and the birth of their son George, the Cox family set out from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, to the state of Indiana to begin their life's adventure. Unfortunately, shortly after the birth of their son Joseph, there was an epidemic of malaria throughout the United States. Indiana happened to be in the heart of this outbreak, and the Cox family was not immune. Samuel and Susanna Cox, as well as both George and Joseph, all contracted malaria and barely survived the ordeal. This prompted the Cox family to move back to Pennsylvania. Samuel cleared a plot and built a cabin in the Spruce Hollow of Blue Knob, the second highest mountain in Pennsylvania at 3,146 feet. The wilderness of this area went for a half a mile in every direction of the Cox cabin. During the night, the Cox family were surrounded by the sounds of panthers and mountain lions. To say the least, the Cox family were truly pioneers of the original Pennsylvania wilds long before this area was tamed. On the early morning of April 24, 1956, Samuel Cox was out hunting for some food to sustain his family. Needless to say, his farm food gains were very thin due to the time of the year, and the need to hunt was essential for his family's basic sustenance and survival. As with many a hollow throughout central Pennsylvania, especially during the month of April, fog was a constant reminder of what the Appalachian Mountains, especially on the Allegheny front, brought to daily life. This day was no different. Samuel came home that morning with no addition to the family food bank. While sitting and eating a meager breakfast, Samuel's dog started barking and ran out of the cabin. Samuel grabbed his gun and immediately followed his four-legged furry friend. He went to see what caused this excitement. In the distance, he heard his dog barking in the forest and decidedly thought that the dog must have treated a squirrel. In his excitement, he ran as fast as he could because a squirrel would make for better eating than what they currently had available. Samuel returned about an hour and a half later along with his dog and a squirrel in hand, only to arrive at home and find his wife Susanna crying. Apparently, in all the excitement of the dog chasing down some food, the children, George, age 7, and Joseph, age 5, had followed their father into the fog and into the woods. Susanna, after calling for the boys for some time, did not know where they were and assumed that they had met up with their father. Samuel and Susanna made out after the boys as the fog in the hollow continued to thicken and the day wore on. By the evening, they still had not found the children. At this point, Samuel sought help from his nearest neighbors, and by the later part of the evening, more than 100 men were searching for the children. This part of Pennsylvania in April has a daily average temperature of 55 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and 40 degrees during the night. That doesn't include factors such as wind chill or the dampness that caused the fog. Fires were lit throughout the forest in the hopes that the children would see the light and go toward them. By the next day, the search party was said to be over 1,000 able-bodied men from Bedford, Cambria, Somerset, and Blair counties, seeking to assist this family in finding their children. Miles of territory were searched, and not a single clue to the whereabouts of the children had emerged. A series of theories of where the boys could be found started to emerge. The prevailing theory was that the boys could have gotten caught in the spring snowmelt surge at the nearby Bob's Creek. A search of the creek for the children was to no avail, not a single sign of where they could have gone. By the third day, the Cox family had a new stress to be concerned about. Heavy suspicion fell upon both Samuel and Susanna Cox. The suspicion was that they concocted a story of the missing children and in reality had murdered their own in the hopes of garnering donation from a sympathetic population. This led to a search of the Cox family garden and the cabin to the point of all the floorboards of the cabin being pulled up, but no bodies were found. At this point in the search for the children, the community of searchers started bringing in mediums, a witch from Somerset County, and a dowser, or a person inspired by God to locate groundwater, buried metals, gemstones, oil, grave sites, all with the use of a Y-shaped twig. In this case, a peach tree limb. They're called a dowsing rod. As a scientist, I'm not exactly a believer in the pseudoscientific or occultist practices inspired by somewhat reproachable non-biblical means or odd forms of parapsychologies brought about with doodle bugging and witches. But I am a believer in the good intents, no matter what the means brought forth by mankind. Although the witch did lead them through specific paths in the forest for several days, she and these other specialists of the dark arts led the searchers out of money, and nothing of the children's whereabouts was procured. Let me know in the comments below if you know of stories and locations such as this one of the lost children. My research is limited only by the information that people don't share openly. Help me break that barrier, and let's share the history and culture of who we once were. As the story is told, a man by the name of Jacob Dibert had remarked to his wife that he wished there was something more he could do for the Cox family, and that God would show him a dream of where the boys were located. Lo and behold, on May 2nd, Jacob Dibert claims to have had such a dream, where he walked a path in the woods, where he saw a dead deer. Further along the path, he came about a child's shoe. Continuing down this path further, he came upon a copse of birch trees in a ravine with a stream where he saw the children sleeping under a birch that had been struck by lightning. Jacob continued to have this dream, now a nightmare, for 2 more days before he told his wife. As the nightmare continued, Jacob felt that this dream must be prophetic and told his brother-in-law, Harrison Wysong. Harrison, having been born and raised in this area, recognized parts of those locations Jacob had described in his dream. He told the other members of the search party, but unfortunately received a negative response and was heckled because of the incidents they had just gone through with the witch and the dowser. On May 8th, Jacob and Harrison set out to search for these locations. Following the clues of the dream step by step, they came across a path with a dead deer, a child's shoe, and a copse of birch within a ravine that had a creek. And here, on May 8th, 1856, George and Joseph Cox were found dead, nestled in the hollow of a dead fallen birch tree, 2 weeks after they had initially vanished. The cause of death had been commonly agreed upon to be due to exposure and possible starvation. Jacob was granted a cash reward for finding the lost children, which he promptly turned over to the Cox family. Samuel and Susanna used the money to purchase the tombstone to mark the graves of their children in the Mount Union Cemetery of Lovely Township, Bedford. So here we are in lovely PA, just outside the United Methodist Church, and we've come upon the Mount Union Cemetery that has the burial site of the Cox children located at row 4, and the podium was donated. That's cool. Pamphlets telling you about the lost children. Didn't know they existed. And we'll make our way up. A little bit windy. And here we find a placard for the Cox children. There's a stone here. That's an actual headstone. I don't know if it's there to hold the pole or if it's actually marking one of the 2 children and they were buried head to toe. And here's the main stone. Many believe Jacob and Harrison had done something horrible with the children to know their exact locations. Others that Jacob's dream was inspired by God or something supernatural. Neither Jacob nor Harrison were charged with any connection to the disappearance or death of the Cox children. On the 50th anniversary of this incident in 1906, donations were collected and a memorial was dedicated to the lost children. In 1910, a monument was raised and put in its place. Some say, if you listen closely, you can still hear the children crying out in the woods. Others claim that they've seen the children peeking around the trees when they walk through this area. All in all, this is just another piece of the story of who we once were and how we've gotten to where we are today.